Coming up on our next installment of America's Hope, we'll focus on the fact that it's the holiday season, but not everyone is happy or jolly. We'll focus on how hope lives and hope gives in times of despair. And we'll also be discussing sexual purity as well as human trafficking. All that and more in our next installment of America's Hope. Good evening, I'm Kelly Wright, and this is America's Hope. We're glad that you could join us this hour, and I'd like to say it's the season to be jolly. But let's be honest, some of us are not into a festive mood at all. With what's going on around the world today, there's wars and rumors of wars, and then it's just plain old living. You've heard the saying, I'm tired of living but scared of dying. Well, a lot of people are going through that during this holiday season. So tonight, we're going to introduce you to someone who's quite concerned about people living in that kind of space. And she goes around the country speaking about hope lives and hope gives. We'll be talking to her about that, and she'll also talk about what she does for young girls throughout the country. She talks to them about a thing called sexual purity. And if that's not enough, we're also going to be focusing on Voices Against Trafficking. Speaking of human trafficking, it's at an all-time high, even during the holiday season. We'll discuss how you can spot it and prevent it. All that and more on America's Hope. Let's get started. Leah Holder Green joins us tonight. She has been teaching quite for so long time, since she was 17, God's Word. She preaches and teaches from the Bible. She talks about a topic like sexual purity and hope lives and hope gives. And she graduated from the University of Texas at Austin and later earned a Juris Doctorate from the University of Texas School of Law. And after practicing law for a few years, well, she entered full-time ministry as a Bible study curriculum specialist and Bible teacher. I think, Leah, you know something about hope and faith and love and how all three of them prevail. Welcome to the program tonight.
Thank you for having me.
So I want to talk to you about the fact that you've been going around the country addressing young ladies of America and the world about sexual purity. Who would have thought it?
Yes, it's a bit of a countercultural topic.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
one thing I have found is that a lot of the brokenness that I encounter when I'm ministering to young women kind of all stems around this issue of purity and sexuality. And one thing I like them to know from the beginning is that sex is not a bad thing. God created it, so He creates good things. But what I would like them to know is that He created boundaries for it. And those boundaries are not to ruin our fun or ruin our good time. Those boundaries are there to protect us. And I believe so. I believe we live in a hypersexualized culture. I mean, any commercial you see, the commercial could be for deodorant, and there's like this sexual innuendo to it. So I think when we add that to our natural nature, because we are sexual beings by nature, we created that way, so we don't really need help getting those desires going per se. But then when you live in this hypersexualized culture where you're just overwhelmed with sexual images, I think that's what it is. It's just it's stirring up, it's awakening that kind of love before it's time.
So when you talk to girls throughout the country, I think most of them would be young teenagers or even some young adults, college age, and they've gone through it. They're no longer virgins, and they're hearing you talk, and for the first time they're hearing something about sexual purity and how much of a gift that can be. What do you do to help them overcome the the guilt they might feel, or the fact that they might have had an unwanted pregnancy, and that's put them into a very challenging situation in terms of being a young mother.
Yes, thank you for asking that because that's a very important part of any message I deliver. I always want to make sure that any woman who already has a past, or as you say, may already be a mother, I want to communicate to them that shame is never from God. Shame, guilt, that's never from God. And one thing I tell them practically, because sometimes I'll hear them say, well, I already messed up. I've already gone down this path, so, I might as well. And so I tell them, I said, let's imagine that somehow you fell and you fell on the street and maybe, a car ran over a part of your leg. And so you're out there. And would you say, oh, well, I'm already in the street. I already have a hurt leg. I think I'll just stay here and lie out here and wait. And they're always like, no. And I said, of course not. You would try to roll or do whatever you could to get in a better position. And
what's happening in America that we perhaps have lost a sense of respecting people and respecting the boundaries that should be there between men and women, so that later on there isn't heartbreak or the thought of abortion and things of that nature?
wow, that is a great question. One of the first things that comes to my mind is a lack of love. Because if we truly love God and if we truly love people, which Jesus says all the commandments can be summed up in those two things, to love God and to love people, we wouldn't be so prone to try to satisfy our desires, release our sexual desires at someone else's expense.
Yeah, it makes sense, and clearly it makes a lot of sense, and a lot of people who are watching this are probably saying, I've been there, I've done that, and I think you have to look at yourself in the mirror and actually be honest with yourself and with God. So Leah, you're no stranger to what you're talking about. I mean, but I should point out that you've been talking this way since you were 17 years of age. You're married, you have children, you're an attorney. How did you gain this kind of insight at the tender age of 17, enough to go out and start telling the world about how you're living?
Wow, I think I've always had a heart for young women, even when I was a teenager myself. And what got me started actually was I started going to these camps as a counselor, and I was bonding with these young women. And that's actually when I learned about this common thread of there are a lot of different ways that, we can be hurt and get these, scars. We all have them. But I kept seeing this common thread of a lot of it going back to our sexuality. And, in some of these young women's cases, their first encounters were not consensual. And so then it was confusing to them. And so they began to kind of react with promiscuity. But that wasn't helping their wounds. It was just worsening. It was creating more wounds. And so I started sharing with them, how I had decided to live. And for some of them, they had never even heard of it, that being an option to save yourself, to save your body, to protect your purity for marriage. And at that time, I was telling them in real time. Then over the years, I continued to mature, and I started to face new struggles. I went off to college, and I fell in love for the first time with my now husband. And what I can honestly say is that by staying committed to wanting to honor God in this way, not so that he could love me more, because that's not possible. We can't earn his love that way. And not so that I could, give myself a check mark, but I just did it because I loved God and I trusted him.
Enjoying this conversation. Hey, look, we're going to take a break. I'd like to come back and talk to you about another matter that hits you close to home. And we're going to talk to Leah Holder Green about how she dealt with losing a loved one. Welcome back to America's Hope. So I'm talking to Leah Holder Green, and what an amazing lady who is happily married and has children, is an attorney, has been teaching women across the country about sexual purity as well as respecting their bodies, respecting themselves in such a way that they can have the view of looking long range how their lives can be if they hold on to faith, hope, and love. Leah, you went through something, and you've been telling people around the country about how hope lives and hope gives, even at a time of devastation when you've lost something that you love, someone that you love. Can you talk to us about it tonight?
Yes. Last year, I was pregnant with my baby girl, Lena Hope, and I went into preterm labor and gave birth to her 3 months before her due date. And initially, the reports were positive. She was breathing on her own. She didn't have to be intubated. However, Lena developed an infection on day 5, and she was gone on day 6. And I don't even think it's accurate to say that it broke me. I would say that it shattered me. And I descended into the darkest place I had ever been. And I think the best way I can describe what happened next is that I hit rock bottom, and I discovered that God was the rock at the bottom.
Wow. Wow.
So when I go and I speak to these young women, I just encourage them to stay within God's boundaries, because I think when we look at our world and our country in particular, when we see the number of people growing up in single parent homes and all just the brokenness that can come when we take sex outside of God's boundaries. So that's the heart of my encouragement, is just do it God's way, because God's way is the best way.
And you know, you bring that up at a time, like you said, it's counterculture to actually talk about being chaste, being pure, and waiting until you're married, virginity. A lot of people get laughed at, boys and girls, teenagers, and as well as young adults. They get laughed at or ridiculed. Why is that? Is that because of what's coming at us in entertainment and media, to the point that it really makes one think, well, I can lower my guard, if only for one night, as Luther Vandross used to sing? Well, first of all, I'm sorry that you lost your baby. Especially in those kinds of circumstances. I mean, in any kind of circumstance, losing a child at any age is always devastating. And you talked about hitting rock bottom, and you found that God was the rock at the bottom. So how did that sustain you and lift you up with hope in the midst of your despair?
It truly was the source of my hope, because when you get news like that, your baby's not going to make it, in the natural earthly context, I mean, that's it. It's so permanent. There's no treatment plan, that's so permanent. But when I realized that God really is real, and this life is not all that there is, and that my baby is with him. She's with God in the presence of the Lord. So the day we lost her, on May 30th, 2022, I declared that I was never going to teach or preach again. Wow. And then in July, I spoke for the first time. And then when the new year came, I have spoken more this year and in more places than I ever have before, sharing the message about the living hope we have in Jesus, that no matter what losses we sustain in this life, that's not the end of the story.
And I love your message. It's so vibrant with hope, which is what we talk about on this show. And hope always comes in the midst of dire circumstances, in the midst of adversity, in the midst of pain. And it looks like you've lost it, and you're not going to hold on to it. And inexplicably, you find out that because of your hope, it proves that not only is there an endurance in that and a perseverance in that, but I don't want to say it makes you invincible, but it sure does make your faith unshakable. Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense. I believe I heard a pastor named Levi Lusko. He says, when you go through these kind of losses and endure, you become like more of a spiritual heavyweight. Like you put weight on and become your faith. It grows and it matures and it gets stronger, which it seems kind of counterintuitive, because you would think, after you go through such a devastation, that your faith might get weaker. And I guess that is an option. But when you truly see that God is who he says he is, and that he's going to do what he says he's going to do, instead of your faith becoming weaker, it actually becomes stronger. And I am experiencing that. It is a journey, but I am experiencing that.
You're right. It's a journey, and I mean, here we are. We're talking about this openly in a quote unquote news setting, and yet we're talking about what arguably many people would say is good news in a bad news world, as I'd like to say. And it's a conversation worth having because, look, many people are in search of hope. Many people are hungry and thirsty for faith and love, and they're seemingly hearing all the negativity things that are going on. And so when you talk about this, and you're an attorney, so you're intellectual, but when you get spiritual and you're talking deep like this, do you find that people are sometimes scratching their heads saying, I didn't come here to talk about faith? and how do you deal with that cynicism and even criticism and sarcasm that would come from people who say, I don't really want to hear anything about faith?
Yes, that is true. I will have people who sometimes almost seem a bit confused when they find out what a woman of faith I am, because they tend to think that intellect and faith are like polar opposites. But what's interesting is you can't check your brain at the door to be a Christian. Like, you actually have to think. And that's why often through scripture, God will encourage us to remember, to think, to use your mind. And so I think part of my approach, and I think probably because I am an attorney, whenever I do speak to people, I kind of come from a more pragmatic approach.
Yeah.
And what I find is that kind of softens them up a little bit. And so when I do get to my faith, they might have, scratched their head a little bit, but they have a certain level of curiosity and they want to hear, well, why do I believe? And so then I love to have those conversations of apologetics, of like, there are actual real intellectually satisfying reasons to believe that Jesus is who he says he is, mainly the resurrection, his resurrection. If you really just do some research on that alone, you'll see that there's just an amazing body of evidence, which, me as the attorney, I find that satisfying. There's an amazing body of evidence that Jesus really did rise. And so I think that kind of helps disarm people just a little bit. And I have found that they tend to be just a bit more receptive when they see that, hey, I'm not encouraging you to check your brain at the door. Even in this case of grief, I'm not encouraging you to just, I call it sprinkling Jesus glitter over things. If you have a loss, do not sprinkle Jesus glitter. It's like, oh, well, no, truly grieve it. That it's tragic. Even for a believer in Christ who, death is not the end. The death is actually, that's still tragic. And we should grieve that and mourn that. But then I offer them, this is what God's word says. And this is why I believe God's word says.
I love that, because we're living right now at a time where everyone's celebrating the holidays, and Christmas is always that special time of the year. And yet there are people who just want to isolate themselves because of loved ones that they've lost, pain that they've been through, and heartbreak and setbacks or a job loss. There are people out here who are hard pressed, they're depressed, and some are even contemplating suicide. So I thought when I had an opportunity to interview you, I said, yeah, let's bring Leah on because she's talking about hope lives, hope gives. Talk to me about that, because there are a lot of people out here during these holidays who are just saying, I just want to check out. I don't want anybody disturbing me. I'm not a bah humbug. I'm not a Scrooge, but I'm just tired and I just want to be left alone.
First, I want to say that if anyone listening, if that's you, I truly understand what that feels like now. I understand when the pain is so intense and you're thinking, because this loss won't change, because this particular circumstance won't change, then the depth of the darkness and the pain that I'm feeling won't change either. And I just want you to know that that's not true. That's not true. If you will allow God to help you, He won't leave you in that place. And although the loss itself and your pain itself may not change, He can give you the grace and the strength to endure with it. It's kind of like if you walk around and you get a weight that you have to carry over time. It's not so much that that weight becomes less heavy, but you can become stronger, right? And so you learn to carry it and bear it better. And so if that's you, please, number one, just know that just because you're in this place now doesn't mean that you're going to stay there. And then also, I want you to know that the reason that I say hope lives and hope gives, number one, this true hope lives because it's rooted in Jesus who lives. And what it gives you is it can give you joy even in the midst of your sorrow. And so if you can, like I say, just keep putting one foot in front of the other. Don't give up. Don't isolate. I'm so glad that you mentioned that. Isolating is one of the worst things we can do because then we're just left with our own thoughts. Please invite other people in. Please find some sort of community. Please share. If you need to go to counseling or therapy, please do that. Counseling and therapy, they're not for crazy people. They're for wise people. That's what I say. Don't isolate. Keep going because this circumstance may not change, but you can change. And you can see better days. And you can enjoy life again. It's just going to take time.
Time it will take, but healing will come. Leah Holder Green, appreciate you joining us on America's Hope. I think you've already answered it, but my final question, what's your hope for America?
Wow. I hope that America can really learn what this living hope is, and that's the hope in Jesus.
Appreciate you, Leah. Thank you so much. My best to you and your family. Don't be a stranger. Come on back anytime. Love to have you.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's an honor. Thank you. God bless you.
God bless you too.
Coming back with more in just a moment. So one of the things that we have to keep reminding Americans of is the fact that there is the specter of human trafficking. And it involves our children, women, and even men who are trafficked through interstate lines and even internationally. And you might wonder why it's so important to talk about during the holiday season. Well, you see, at the height of the holiday season, there's a lot of human trafficking going on. It could be sex trafficking, child exploitation. The bottom line is it does exist, and we have to remove the scales from our eyes in order to address it, to be on the lookout, because the Department of Homeland Security has made it a national priority to do away with human trafficking. So one of the best people that I could think of to talk to us about this clear and present danger is Andi Buerger. She is a survivor. She is also an author, and she is also someone who has attained her Juris Doctorate. And, might I add, she's the founder of Voices Against Trafficking. And of course, Andi, you are the founder of that, and you've been doing such a great work in the field of helping so many women men and children learn what they need to do to escape human trafficking as well as prevent themselves from becoming victims of it. Talk to me about the holiday season and why it's so important to remind people that human trafficking is an evil that does exist.
Well, thank you, Kelly, so much. Appreciate being back on your show. And you're right, the holiday season, regardless of what somebody celebrates, we're thinking more crowds, more shopping, more grocery stores, more parking lots, more malls, things that people are going to be visiting maybe a little more often than they might normally do that, or shopping online, which is just as dangerous for children and for families as actually being somewhere. So let me give you just a little bit of when we have a lot of people, for example, big box stores. And as you mentioned, thank you for saying it, men and women are also targeted. We had a woman who was married. Her husband was in a big box store. She was grocery shopping, and she noticed a gentleman that was just kind of going up and down the same aisle she was going. But she didn't think much about it, except he didn't have any groceries in the cart. So she got a little nervous, and so she went down another aisle, and there he was at the end of that aisle. And so she started looking for her husband and called out for him. He heard her voice, looked, and came to where she was, and she told him what was happening. Well, this guy, they ended up going through the checkout stand with their groceries. This gentleman then went as well. He checked out with nothing in his basket, kind of pretending to put things through the little self-checkout laser deal. You can tell I'm really techno, but and he had nothing, and he eventually left. But what if she hadn't had her husband there that day? What if she had been there with a grandchild or her niece? And so with children, a lot of times it's easy to say, oh sure, go look in the toy section, mommy will be right over here, or daddy will be right over there. Please do not leave your children unattended, because predators are very fast. It takes 3 seconds to grab a child. You're talking 60 pounds and under. But even if they're a little heavier, they get distracted by someone else showing them a toy they might like. If it's a little girl, let's say, and she's in the doll section, well, what do you think a predator will do? Oh, hey, I've got lots of dolls over here, right? Why don't you come look over here, which is towards the exit or the bathroom? So it's just simple awareness things that we forget because we're in a hurry, we're tired, we're trying to get a lot done. But when it comes to our children, Kelly, we cannot afford to be lazy. We must be aware.
I'm grateful that your organization brings awareness to this. Also during the holiday season, what kind of help should people expect from law enforcement? Because let's face it, they're overtaxed. They're having to do so much during this time of the year.
Well, one of the best things they can do ahead of time, of course, is to either go to their law enforcement office, agency, or find out, hey, what do you want us to report, or what should we be looking for in our town? And sometimes law enforcement won't have a lot to say because they don't get much training, Kelly. They get very little in mental health, identification and assessment, as well as human trafficking, even though it's more out there in the general public and like you said, they're taxed. So if you see something, please say something. If you're out and about, if you're on a plane, if something looks odd, it probably is. Don't be afraid to talk to a flight attendant. They're trained in helping to assess. If you are out somewhere, you see something in a parking lot, or you see something at somebody's house, 911 is there for a purpose. If you're uncomfortable with that, then at least have our helplines and hotlines at voicesagainsttrafficking.com in your phone. You can call a neutral party. It's a suicide awareness hotline. There's a child trafficking hotline. There's a child abuse hotline. We have all of these there. So guess what? If we're prepared, we see something, we're more confident to say something because we're calling a line to an agency that will actually know what to do and how to help in any part of our country. So if you're in Kansas or Montana, it won't matter.
Andi, thank you for that. That's really important information that people need to know about getting in touch with Voices Against Trafficking. And look, let's be clear. You've been through this.
Yes.
You're not just talking as an analyst or some expert. You have actually lived through this. Without going down and through that deep, dark tunnel, I'd like you to at least explain to people what you had to endure and overcome to get beyond that and then become the person that you are today?
Absolutely. And one of the reasons I'm passionate about people seeing something and saying something, because that could have changed my life in a lot of different ways. So back before there was even a term called human trafficking, from in the early 60s, I was actually trafficked by family members, all immediate, male and female, and some extended family members from the age of 6 months to 17 years old. And Kelly, as we've spoken before, things were so bad when a 5-year-old is being beaten to death and tortured and touched and had other people handling them. It makes a lot of people uncomfortable to hear that, but imagine the child involved in that. So I went to the curb of my house and I thought, you know what? I'd rather be dead than to have to go back and endure what I was enduring. Nobody was going to hear the screams, and if they did, no one was going to do anything about it in those days. It wasn't the culture. But now we have a lot more awareness. But for a child who's 5 to decide that it's better to be dead and to try and throw herself in front of a car, in front of her house, that's how desperate it was. But in that moment, God met me there, because I looked into that huge sky. There was no car coming by, amazingly. And I thought, maybe there's something bigger than the people hurting me. And in my heart, I heard a voice say, this is not the plan I have for you. Suicide is not the answer. Now, it didn't make everything easy, but I had a couple more attempts, but God was always there. And then the last time my birth mother tried to kill me, I was 17. So I really had a passion to help other kids not go through that if I could, once I got out.
Andi, thank you for sharing that story. And I'm more grateful to God for saving you and sparing your life so that you can tell the message to so many other people. And you've helped countless of people through the organization Voices Against Trafficking, which is now international, of course. Well, we're going to take a break, and when we come back from the break, I'd like you to tell us about more things that Voices Against Trafficking is involved in, and how you're bringing more awareness to people, and some of the fundraising things that you're doing. Because you don't do this on a dime. You do have to have some funding in order to get more awareness out there, not only for people who are ordinary people, but also, like you said earlier, for law enforcement, which sometimes does not have a clue about how to deal with this kind of ugliness that goes on in our world today. Andi Buerger talking to us right now. We're back in just a moment. Welcome back to America's Hope. So it is the time to be jolly. It's the joyful season of the holidays. But beneath all the joy and all the glitter and all the wonderful feelings, there is this specter of evil that keeps lurking. And we're talking about human trafficking tonight because it's a tough, hard subject to discuss during the holidays. But boy, if we don't tell you, brothers and sisters out there who are watching this program tonight, you may be someone who knows of a victim. You may be living next door to someone and not even know that they've been victimized by child exploitation and human trafficking, especially at this time of year. We're talking to Andi Buerger now. She is the founder of Voices Against Trafficking, and she is proactive. She is a survivor. I like to say more than a survivor, Andi, you are an overcomer, because you just didn't survive, you overcame, and then you went on to get your education, and look how you're turning it around and preventing other people from falling to harm's way. Yet this menace still continues, and it's spreading. What is Voices Against Trafficking doing to try to help reduce the rate of human trafficking, which is at an all-time high right now?
Absolutely. Well, you said it correctly, reduce. We know that we can never get rid of human depravity. That's just something that that part of evil is not something we can do ourselves. But what we can do, like you said, is reduce the numbers, reduce incentives for predators to be trolling the internet. Up to 500,000 a day are looking for children, looking for product that they can sell, exploit, and use. But what Voices is doing, because we believe that, one, if we create greater public awareness, Kelly, just like you're doing today, being part of the solution, getting the word out there. If we create the awareness, then we can teach the prevention. We can help get the prevention, because prevention is what really will end human trafficking, or at least turn the tide away from the predators winning and our children and other people being safer. So first thing, awareness. Second thing, prevention. And then giving them tools like education, helpline and helpline numbers, the books, the magazines, a CD, which we can talk about in a moment, but giving different tools for the average person to say, oh, okay, I get it. Or I read this book and they had a bunch of chapters from different people, and now I can have a conversation with my family, or whatever it is. We want to provide as many tools for the tool belt of the parent, of the grandparent, of the teacher, of the educator, the law enforcer, so that there are no more like, I don't know what to do, or I've just re-traumatized the victim because I was unaware that saying this or doing that would do that. Mm-hmm. So the books, our magazine called Voices of Courage is out, and it's celebrating everyday heroes, people that are doing the work to protect every human's rights, whether it's against human trafficking or other violations. But we want to help people understand these are real human beings that are being affected. And if we do not collectively combine as a united voice, one powerful voice against it, not as political factions, because as you know, human trafficking is not about right versus left. It's about right versus wrong. It is simply wrong to take another human being, however old, whatever gender, and sell them or force them to be a slave labor or to use them for debt reduction. It's just wrong.
Yeah, Andi, it's really good and evil. It really is. It's the forces of good going against the forces of evil. We talk a lot about the victims, and we talk about how to prevent victimization. Let's talk about the predators for a moment. Have you ever encountered in your work, and you do an incredible work, have you ever encountered predators who have been on the wrong side of the law and at some point had a complete turnaround and have turned around to help people avoid and actually give law enforcement, give organizations the wherewithal to understand what's going on? Does that ever happen? I know it's a strange question, but I ask that because when you look at Sound of Freedom, you see that some people have been closely, and The Sound of Freedom, of course, is a movie about human trafficking, but you see that people who are in that circle, some of them are heartless, but then there are those who perhaps come to the end of themselves and realize they need to turn their lives around.
Well, it's not a strange question, and it's just not a question that we have a lot of answers to, but for one instance out of my, how many decades, 20, 30 years, so 2 or 3 decades, probably only one predator. And that's because she was recruited as a minor into sex trade, sex slave, stripping, all the different kinds of evil things that she was made to do, with thousands of Johns who used her over a 10-year period of time. And amazingly, she was able to escape at some point, found God, is putting her life together. But she participated in recruiting, just like in the Maxwell Epstein case. Ghislaine Maxwell was great at recruiting young girls. Hey, you want to be like me? Look at my nice clothes and my nice nails and my pretty things, and I've got a party you can come to. So she was involved in that, not because she would have chosen that, but for the fact that she had been taken, that she had been introduced to that lifestyle. Now, that is so rare, Kelly. I mean, I wish there were more out there. I've seen news headlines saying, oh, this person was a serial killer. Now they're telling, law enforcement how to catch them. And maybe there are some predators like that. But I do not personally know that after all those years.
Yeah, the question just came to mind because we know that law enforcement is trying to learn and discover and break through and penetrate this darkness with the light of hope that we can help prevent this from going on. Your organization has done so much. You've got your Voices of Courage magazine. You now have a CD coming out about human trafficking and Voices Against Trafficking. Talk to me about that and how that will spur more awareness and even more funding to make people aware.
Absolutely. Broken Treasures is the title of the music compilation. It's being put together by a multi-platinum selling Grammy nominated record producer. And I'm going to brag on you a little bit because guess who's on that CD as well? Our very own Kelly Wright. But here's what it's going to do. Those sales, we have public service announcements that are being recorded in over 30 languages right now. Those proceeds from the sale of the CD, the flash drive, or the digital download are going to do four very important things for us next year. Number one is we want to create a special kind of recovery house for victims of sexual trauma, human trafficking, because they have very specific needs that the average counselor cannot meet. And we need a lot of different kinds of services all in one place. So we'd like to do a pilot recovery house in one of the states that is really hard hit, and then also hopefully get one in every state to do that. The next thing is we have two different kinds of educational programs. One allows us the Be Aware, Stay Safe program, allows any family unit, single, married, grandparent, foster parent, 4 minutes a day, Kelly, 21 days to create a habit that will enhance not only their situational awareness for human trafficking, but any crime in general. So it's a program designed to instill a lifestyle of being aware. And so even if you're not affected, maybe you can help someone else from being a victim of some crime. The second part of that is a model called Senpai, and it's a social communication skills model from Australia. A friend of mine, also a survivor overcomer who has like 2 PhDs in the psychotherapy part of helping severely traumatized children. She created it, and what it does is if we're allowed into the schools, if we're allowed into homes and daycares, it will help a 5-year-old vet another 5-year-old's situation with a few questions like, hey, did you sleep last night? If not, did someone come into your room? Were you tired? Did you not eat? It'll also vet for hunger. It will vet for abuse. And at the very end of this program, I'm oversimplifying it right now, but the bottom line is at the end, the peer-to-peer vetting will end with, do we need an adult to help us? So can you imagine if we had 5, 6, 7-year-olds who can assess what's going on with their friend, and then when an adult gets involved, we stop it before they become a preteen, teenager, young adult. Because then you have the hormones and you have, all these different confusing things happening. So we're excited to bring that out. And then also we have a very highly skilled person who's going to lead 2 teams to actually do active rescues. So holding the key, which is the subtext, Broken Treasures, you hold the key, means everyone that purchases this, they are going to contribute to us rescuing and giving help, healing, and hope to victims through special services, as well as providing the means for us to continue creating more tools.
Andi, that's phenomenal. How do people get a hold of all of this? Do they go to your website? What's the best way?
Absolutely. VoicesAgainstTrafficking.com. The CD is already there for purchase, and we also have the magazine. You can go to voicesofcourage.media. But again, if you go to voicesagainsttrafficking.com, you can find everything you need there and just hit the tab that says store. If you would like to just say, hey, you know what, I don't have a lot, but I just want to be part of the solution, you can certainly donate. We're a 501c3 organization. And again, we are reaching the world with the messaging that we can be better, we can do better, we can be the national and global community that says enough when it comes to selling our children, selling their organs, and hurting others simply for profit.
Yeah, Andi, look, I thank you for talking about this tough subject, but we need to stay focused on it even during the holidays. My final question is, what's your hope for America and the world because of what you do?
Oh, my hope is that one more person becomes aware, one less person becomes a victim, and one more predator, like you said, either is redeemed or they go directly where they need to go, to jail for life without hope of release, because that is the only way to keep them from touching someone else. What people don't realize, Kelly, is that victims have a life sentence. I'm doing what I'm doing, but I also have PTSD. I have my moments, but I manage it better than most people because I've had to practice and I got the help I needed. There are voiceless people out there that can't get it. So saving one more person, putting away one more predator, but more importantly, that we become a community that cares about our neighbor more than we care about ourselves again, because that's what America used to be.
Andi, I have much respect and love for you. Thank you. God bless you for what you do,
You.
being a voice to the voiceless and hope to the hopeless. Thank you again for Voices Against Trafficking. That's Andi Buerger. Make sure you check out her organization, voicesagainsttrafficking.com. Thanks, Andi. God bless you.
Thanks, Kelly. You have a great Christmas.
You too. And welcome back to America's Hope. I'd like to thank our guests who appeared on tonight's program, Leah Holder Green, Hope Lives, Hope Gives, and, of course, my good friend Andi Buerger of Voices Against Trafficking. My final word is this. We've got a lot of work to do. Daily, we must never give up on educating ourselves and learning how to embrace hope in the midst of difficult times. Because the bottom line is, as we've heard tonight, through it all, hope lives and hope gives. Good night, America. Your America and my America.
United we stand, divided